folks. I'm Sam Chandan, Silverstein Chair and Dean of the Schack Institute of Real Estate at the NYU School of Professional Studies. As every week, thank you so much for joining us. Thrilled you could be here for the REIT series. We did kick this off, as any returning guests know, in July 8th with Sam Zell, and each week, with only a few exceptions, virtually every week, we've hosted a different REIT chairperson, CEO, or board member for a really timely and insightful discussion of what's happening in the industry and where we may find ourselves, not only in the short term, but in the medium and long term, in what we certainly hope will be one day a post-pandemic environment. It's my privilege to co-host this series with three great friends and colleagues: Scott Robinson, faculty member here at Schack and the director of NYU's REIT Center, Adam Emmerich and Robin Panovka. Adam and Robin are the co-chairs of the REIT M&A practice at Wachtell Lipton. Robin is also a board member at Schack, and Adam and Robin are both board members of the REIT Center. Robin will be joining us again very soon. He's been out the last couple of weeks, but it's been an absolute privilege for me to work with Robin, Adam, and Scott on this series. Thanks, as always, to Monmouth and to Mike Landy and his team for sponsoring the summer series. Mike and the team have been consistent supporters of the Schack Institute, and particularly now where many of our students have seen their financial capacities, impacted by the pandemic, or their families' capacities impacted by the pandemic. That support has made a bigger difference than ever. Just as a quick reminder, we do host our capital markets series every Thursday, where we're joined, or every other Thursday, I should say, where we're joined by a leader in the capital market space. Last week, Tammy Jones, CEO of Basis Investment Group, chair of the Real Estate Executive Council, and a board member at both Crown and Crown Castle and at Matt Cowley, joined us. This is all a lead up to the 53rd Annual Capital Markets Conference, which we'll be hosting on November 11th, 12th, and 13th. The lineup is absolutely spectacular. One of our focus areas this year is diversity and inclusion, and the importance of making more progress in the real estate capital market space. We are co-hosting a Women in the Capital Markets Roundtable, a Pride Roundtable for LGBTQ attendees. We are also reprising our panel on the Black experience in real estate with a focus on the capital markets. I will share a link to that conference in the chat. And just as a reminder, registration for all of the general sessions for that conference, as well as our roundtables, is entirely complimentary. So please do join us for that. We're looking forward to seeing you. We have all of our returning, rock stars, Stephen Ross, Bill Rudin, Larry Silverstein, Scott Reckler, Wendy Silverstein. They'll all be there. So please sign up for the complimentary general sessions. As a final reminder, Scott and I are going to drop off. We'll come back in a little bit so that we can post some of the questions from participants. I will be monitoring the chat, but please use the Q&A. Drop your question in there. If you see a question you like, hit the upvote button. It makes it rise in the order of priority. So we will ask Mary the questions that are most popular. You can also comment now on the questions that other people are posing. Without further ado, we are so excited to be joined by Mary Hogan Preusse. Let me pass it off to Adam for a formal introduction.
Thanks, Sam and Scott. It's great to be here with you again today. Mary, thank you so much for joining us. People, I think, all have your resume in the email, but I'll just briefly touch on your great career in real estate, which you're right in the middle of. You graduated from Bowdoin with a degree in math. And you're on the board there now, which is great. So you know about higher education too. But as far as I can tell, from the moment you left college until now, you've been a real estate lifer. You started out as an investment banking analyst. You were a sell-side analyst. Then you spent about 17 years at APG, the Dutch pension fund manager here in the U.S., rising to run or co-head their U.S. real estate investment activities, with, I think, about $13 billion in real estate assets here in the U.S. And so you were, making decisions, studying all aspects of real estate in the public markets. And then you switched over in 2017, founded Sturgis Partners, and you've gone on the board of, I think, at least 5 companies: Industrious, a private leading edge co-working company, as well as 4 public companies in quite diverse sectors of a REIT, Kimco, Digital Realty, and Host Hotels and Resorts. So you have a tremendous range of experience, tremendous, background and depth in real estate. So really looking forward to getting your perspectives on a whole bunch of stuff today. Thanks so much again for being with us here today. I'm just going to jump in a kind of a random place, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about all sorts of different aspects of public company, REIT, real estate stuff. You were, and it was kind of hand in glove because it's a focus, I think, of APG's perspective on the world, really an early adopter and a leader in ESG matters on when you were an investor and now in your role as a board member. Can you tell us a little bit what companies are doing in the ESG area these days?
Yeah, sure. It was one of the things that I was most proud of at APG was that it was a socially responsible investor. As far back as 2002, we were focusing on board composition and governance issues. Like my first trip to the Netherlands, that's why I went, to learn more about that. And then I think it was in about 2009 when we started focusing on environmental issues and how important that was to investors. And we co-founded this the survey called GRESB, which has become kind of the industry standard for comparing real estate companies and their environmental footprint. And the process of watching companies trying to urge, politely urging and then kind of requiring our investments to fill out that form, that survey was a really sort of interesting window into leadership and excellence at the company, sort of how seriously they took it at the time. And at the time, I have to say, a lot of companies did not take it that seriously. At the time, a lot of companies said, well, I'm gonna have to hire somebody to look at this, or I'm gonna have to hire 2 people to look at this. And I think all those companies are so grateful now that they have these teams that they've had in place for many years to look at it. You fast forward to 2020, and I would say that up until 2020, I would say the focus in real estate has been on the E and the G. And even as recently as last year, I would be on calls about this issue. People didn't really know how the S mattered. Well, now nothing matters more, right? Than these social issues. And so, so going back from a time when we were having to beg companies to fill out a survey about their environment, about their footprint, to being concerned about fires that are sweeping across our country, about inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality, and then again, best in class governance. It's been a great ride, and I think it's never been more important than it is today.
On S&G, so to speak, is there a real estate specific aspect, or are those issues about responsibility, diversity, board membership, leadership cultivation, and that kind of thing? Is there a real estate, or is it just that real estate companies, like all companies, need to focus on that and attend to that?
Yeah, I think it was just that real estate companies, it was always assumed that there were certain hurdles they could achieve and certain ones they couldn't. And now I think bringing all these issues to the forefront, I'm sure that investors never asked in a one-on-one meeting with a company about issues about human capital and asking about, stakeholders beyond shareholders, employees, customers, all that kind of thing. And I would say on the governance piece, kind of the whole, one of the things that really motivated me to sort of pivot my career in 2017 and do this is APG was part of a consortium of socially responsible investors that reached out to companies in the S&P that had 2 or fewer women on their boards, saying that we would vote against their non-gov committees ultimately if they did not improve diversity on their boards. And in the S&P at that time, there were 77 companies that met that criteria, and 24 were real estate companies. That was too much. So yeah, we've come a long way. We had a long way to go, and we've come a long way.
Right. On the E side, obviously, unlike a cloud computing company. I guess cloud computing companies have to deal with their data centers, and you know something about that. But does the physicality of real estate, mean that real estate companies have kind of a unique opportunity and a unique responsibility on the environmental side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, on the plus side, they can be leaders in terms of, air quality, making sure that you can charge an electric car easily at their shopping center or their office building. So, there are some basic things like that. And that also, of course, resonates with tenants who are looking for those issues also. I think more recently, this focus on environmental issues has really made people think about even where companies' assets are located, and how many assets are you comfortable having on the Florida coast? How many are you worried about California and fires? So I think that geography and climate change have also become as much of an issue as some of those other things.
And how do you think we're doing? I mean, overall, not your companies, which I know you're not here to speak about in particular, but just the real estate industry from and I'm sure you followed it broadly after your time at APG. Are we, 10% of the way where we should be in an ideal world, 50%? How do you evaluate on E in particular, I guess?
I would say, on all of them, I think we're doing the best we can. I think the US is lagging the rest of the world on E, but that's a function of just how old a lot of our buildings are and the way they're used. But I think that there's a lot of great lessons to be learned from the real estate industry to other industries in terms of how well we've done on that metric. Yeah, so I think so. I think that really, I think that diversity in the real estate industry is probably the thing that needs to be worked on the most of the three kind of right now.
And do we continue to be, I guess I could say we're all heavily involved in the REIT world, in the real estate world. Are we still the laggard with, a third of the laggards being REITs, or that statistic you cited? Do you think the REIT industry has been particularly, obdurate when it comes to getting with the program?
Oh yeah, no, I think, one of the most improved, I have to say. And I mean, I honestly, I joined 4 boards. I was part of it, probably helped. But I think in the last, especially in the last year and a half, I mean, actually of the boards I sit on that have added additional members since I joined, they have been women. I feel great about that. And I think that, California sort of going with these, mandating their companies to do this is not, I mean, there's some things in that's not to love. People don't love, you don't want to be a quota. You don't want to feel like you're just there because of a certain thing. But it is a blunt instrument that's effective in getting people to pay attention to the fact that that there need, more diversity in the boardroom can lead to more diversity in senior management, and that's got to start somewhere at the company. So I think that this blunt instrument is helping.
We as a global community in the, public traded and not publicly traded companies are in the middle of a big dialogue about corporate purpose and social responsibility and all kinds of stuff like that. And we're also in the middle of a dialogue here in the US in particular about, long-termism versus short-termism and activism. Obviously, your experience at APG, you were a long-term investor looking to create value for shareholders and stakeholders. Sometimes, so-called activists also latch on to these issues. Do you think that is that a true statement, I guess is what I would say? Do you think that sometimes these kind of issues are misused by people with other agendas?
Well, I think that, the best companies are the best companies, right? I mean, you see a lot of research being done showing that companies that have really worked on, reducing their footprint and or have diverse boards or whatever, there's an index of ESG stocks, and it's shown that outperforms the market. And I don't know that that's because of those specific decisions, or whether it's just because the great companies want to be the best on all those things. And I would say that, well, yeah, activists, you just don't want to give an activist a reason to, you don't want them to find a chink in your armor to go after. You don't want to have that flaw. And so I think that, I don't know that exploiting is the right word, because, I think it's on the companies to have the best board, the best practices that they can possibly have.
It's a great answer. Thanks. What surprised you? I mean, you've joined these 4 or 5 boards in the last, 4 years. You've dealt with these same companies, and not those companies in particular, but all, publicly traded REITs for your whole career. What was the biggest shock to you when you got inside the room and saw life from the other side of the table in a way?
Well, the first thing, to my relief, when I sort of went about this process and was trying to figure out this idea of joining boards and what kind of companies, exactly how to proceed, I sort of looked inward and said, what really worked for me as a stock picker was betting on the right management. And so that's what I tried to do. I tried to focus on great management teams. I also tried to spread myself around real estate to the best extent I could, so that I would have a variety of experiences that would hopefully be complementary at some level. And so that did work out really well. I work with some great people. I would say a couple things. One is, I think, getting to see the bench behind the 2 or 3 people you get to see as an investor has been really, really something. So getting to know the, sort of the caliber of people at the companies. And I think that's true for, obviously, so many of the companies in our universe. It's a hard job. Not that my job wasn't hard, but there's some gratification that goes along with you make a bet and the stock goes up. You're like, I did that. That is not what happens when you're building something or selling something. I mean, or it's just very different. Everybody says it's how the sausage is made, that there's really an element to that. The fact that the CFO job, so much of the CFO job is managing people. It's not just, so, a lot of people that did what I did are like, I think I might just want to go be a CFO at a REIT. Well, just because you know how to analyze a financial statement, that's not going to get you there. You need a whole bunch more skills. And also, I have to say, and this might be my own flaw coming into this, the number of decisions that I've come to understand, the number of decisions that, things like tax, depreciation, these complicated structuring issues, and managing all that and making sure to be doing, what's right for shareholders. That has been super interesting. I think if you look at what's happening with AIMCO right now, that's a great illustration of that.
In terms of the role of the board versus management, as you said, when you're on the investor side, you're dealing with 2 or 3 people. You don't see the people, the vast bulk of people in the organization. You don't see the board very often. Sometimes you do. Do you think we have, again, not talking about your companies, but just now that you've had, insight into it, do we have the balance right in terms of the role of the board versus management, or is there too much micromanagement, too little engagement? What would you say about how boards are set up?
It's a little bit of a dance. This has also been hard for me because I like to be all in all the time, and I was pretty hands-on with my team at APG. But probably one of my very first board meetings, I got advice from a woman named Ann Carlogos, and she said, "Nose in, hands off." Like, that's perfect. That's what you have to do as a board member. You want to, if a pin drops at Kimco, I want to know it, but it's not my job to to tell everybody exactly how it's supposed to go all the time, because, to be honest, I don't really know, right? I can, I view my role as advising senior management.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that I do bring a particular expertise of having been an investor and having the investor. I mean, all of my boards do say that, as they say that having the investor perspective in the boardroom is super helpful in terms of evaluating how things are going.
So what would you, if you had the opportunity to, go into a sort of a time machine, what would you, as your board self, tell your investor self you should have understood as an investor now that you've been on the board side of things?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just that, I could have sat in my office and said, ugh, what they really should do is just sell all the nursing homes and buy a whole bunch of like life science buildings. Just do that. That is not a thing that anyone can do, right? So make sure to have a little humility in terms of evaluating, what's going on with these companies. I think that, at APG, we were long-term investors, but we also had a tactical time horizon. We had sort of two different strategies. And being able to see, sitting and, just the exposure to crisis management and corporate strategy I'm getting on these boards, and people's ability to take the long view, and the exquisite challenge of trying to be the best company you can in 5 years, while also, beating consensus for next year. It's super complicated. And so I think that REIT investors tend to get just a little, the REIT mafia, or whatever you want to call it, people really get in the weeds in terms of, or not in the weeds, but just almost more silo thinking, just sort of looking at REITs relative to REITs, and stepping back and having more of a context, a long-term context of corporate strategy. I wish I'd been able to understand that more.
So you touched on consensus. I mean, some people have suggested radical things for American public companies, like no quarterly reporting. Would you do something, if you could just wave a magic wand, to sort of insulate is the wrong word, but maybe free managements and board of directors to be less shackled with all these short-term reporting and short-term comparisons? Would that improve long-term performance?
Well, I do think that there's a price to being public. Okay, like there's times there's been times even in the 30 years I've been doing this, where having access to the public markets, being a public company is better. Sometimes being a private company is better because of the mark to market. But I would say over the history of time, and like particularly you see it right now, having access to capital guaranteed by being a public company. I mean, you may not like the price, you may not like the coupon, but it's guaranteed. I think you owe people that are giving you that opportunity, a look inside 4 times a year.
Yeah. 30 years is a great segue to something else I wanted to ask you about, which is, as a real estate investor, and I guess really as a real estate manager in a enterprise setting, in a board setting, your universe is limited to real estate. And, is that a plus in a way for let's say on the investor side? In other words, when you're thinking about real estate, should you just be comparing real estate investments, among themselves, or thinking about real estate versus other things?
Yeah, no, I think that I actually think that there's been a few times sort of in history where the dedicated REIT people, or maybe just this dedicated REIT person, has missed something huge that was happening because I was too micro focused on what I was doing. For example, a few years ago, a gaming company spun off its real estate into a REIT, and it was outside advised. It only had one tenant. It wasn't diversified geographically, and it had a high dividend yield. And I was, I would not touch that. That doesn't meet my very high standards. And I was taking the train home with a friend of mine who's fixed income, worked at a credit hedge fund, and they're like, I am all over that company because it's got a high dividend yield and a good credit. And that was it. I was so wrong, and they were so right. So that's one example. I also think that since 2016, when REITs became their own asset class in the S&P, that the way people are looking at the stocks have really changed. And I even think from company to company, I'm not sure everybody still realizes that. I mean, some people are saying, should I buy Kimco or should I buy Federal? Some people are saying that. But some people are saying, should I buy Kimco or should I buy Digital? And then some people are saying, should I buy BXP or should I buy JP Morgan? And so you need to make sure that your company is a good, you want to make sure this investment looks good to other things, just not the thing that's most like it.
And over the course of your career, obviously the REIT sector has gotten, hugely bigger and also hugely more diverse, not in the sense we were talking about before in terms of diversity in the boardroom and management and leadership and so forth, but in terms of, companies like Digital, cell tower companies, all kinds of companies. I mean, is it the right way to think about it in a way? Are all these still, is particularly when you're looking at some of these technology, high tech type of situations, is the core skill set real estate, or is it something else?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. My first thought, a pro tip, these new companies, they tend to be good stocks. Like they really do, and it's not just the data center companies. It's Invitation Homes, it's cold storage. I think that companies that have strong backing, that are innovators in real estate. That's really what we're talking about. I mean, there are some companies I think that maybe are seeing the tax structure as advantageous to them, but companies that are innovating in the real estate industry, those are going to be good stocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I watched Michael Billerman's this a couple of weeks ago, and he's always great. And and the research he did a couple months ago, just showing how the core food groups, as we say, core real estate, how much it's declined in the real estate benchmarks, is quite shocking, right? And so I would say that that's something where people need to spend more time thinking about why that's happening. And there's tons of reasons why it's happening, but I believe that the core sectors, they need to innovate they need to innovate within their boxes just the same way as these new asset classes are. I mean, they have great teams, they have technological expertise. There are things that can be done. It's also just, it would be nice if we need bigger companies that we can bet on in the core space.
And do you think some of these core companies are just, at this point, and maybe, exacerbated or accelerated by the pandemic? Are we witnessing the end of, inner city core business district office space, or, shopping is going to be reduced to half or a quarter of the footage that it used to be in the United States? Or are we in the middle of seismic changes in some of these core areas, or you think it's to some extent a pandemic blip in part?
Like I mostly think that this is a change. This is a huge change. What I don't know is how much of a short-term change it is. But I was thinking about just sort of looking back on history and thinking about where REITs are right now, in terms of valuation, and specifically talking about the conventional asset classes. And through this whole pandemic, the president of Bowdoin College used this expression: everybody has their apex of misery, right? Like, I thought mine was in April, but I've had like 4 since then. My kids are kind of like now, but I think the apex of misery for REITs is right now. And I wrote down something to tell you. A guy I worked with at APG, Liam Wertheimer, who succeeded me, he runs the listed portfolio there now. He always said that REITs, it's uncertainty. An element of uncertainty is when REITs do the worst. Mm-hmm. We are there, right? We not only are we uncertain about next year's numbers, like we've never had a time when people don't actually have to pay their rent right now in many municipalities, right? So somebody's looking after the tenant, and somebody's looking after the bank. Nobody is looking out for the landlord, and not all landlords are big giant REITs. It's a thing. But I think this is the apex of misery, because there's a bunch of things that we need to see to get things going again. And I think there's probably some interesting buying opportunities in all of the conventional asset classes, right? Because, we need 2021 guidance, and we're going to get that, like not this month, not next month, but we're going to get it. The election, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we might not know that this month or next month either, but we're going to get it. We need some mark to market and private real estate to help people feel confident about public real estate relative valuations. And I don't know when we're going to get that, but I'd like to think we'd get it soon. There's so much capital sitting on the sidelines. Holiday, I think once we see how the retailers get through the holidays and who makes it and who doesn't, that's another thing. Holiday travel, whether places stay open and people can travel, if people are starting to get back to work. So any one of those things is going to help people start to adjust and adjust their expectations for REITs and figure out at what level they want to take a bet on office or shopping centers or hotels or apartments. And so the good news is you can see what they are, and you know they're coming soon, but you just don't know when.
Yeah. Maybe it's a segue, maybe it's a non sequitur, but NAV, right? People in the REIT world talk all about NAV all the time and about discount to NAV. And I don't have your experience on the financial firing line, but it's always confused me because I guess I studied economics and I was told the market was perfect and so forth. So how can there be these big gaps? Is there such a thing as NAV? Do stocks really demonstrate huge variations from what their underlying assets are worth?
I mean, I think that again, it's we were always an earnings shop at APG in the short run, but to compare public real estate to private real estate, you do need to have some kind of an NAV.
Mm-hmm.
What in my experience, when you see a gap to NAV, somebody is really wrong, right? Like the market has it wrong, or the public market has it wrong, or the private market has it wrong. And it's usually the public market is directionally correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that actually goes back to my previous point. I don't think you can say, with the exception, I think, of apartments. I think there's been a recent meaningful mark to market in apartments, but in any other sector, there hasn't been anything to trade to validate what we thought was an appropriate cap rate for that sector 6 months ago or 12 months ago. Once we have that, then maybe you can start to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that REIT-wise, unless you're talking about REITs that could potentially be taken private or otherwise acquired, which is not as easy as it sounds because of it's expensive to buy a public company. But really, investors want earnings growth, and that is not NAV.
Well, let me ask you about that since you brought it up. What about going private and merger activity after this moment arrives, which I hope you're right about, that we're going to get a little more clarity about where things are in the world and stability? Are we going to see a big wave of going private and M&A activity in the next, 12, 18 months?
People who know me that are on this call know that I'm going to say yes, because I've thought that like for 30 years. So you have to understand that I thought that for a long time. But yes, I think so. I think that we have some demographic reasons why you might start to see consolidation. There's some succession issues at some companies. It's hard to, scale is very, very helpful in a bunch of sectors. And again, going back to Michael Billerman's report showing how small some of these sectors have got, these sectors have gotten relative to the entire benchmark I think to stay relevant to the broader investment community, which you need. I think that size helps. I think there's a lot of economies of scale that can happen from M&A. And again, I think that coming from a bigger platform will give companies the opportunity to innovate in a way that they need to do to stay relevant, like these non-core companies are doing.
So it's really kind of the old-fashioned core kind of retail, office, hotel, apartment. Those are the places where you think there's going to be the most ferment in a way?
I mean, I don't know. I mostly think that because that's where like I said, I think once we start to get some visibility on those things I mentioned, mm-hmm. you are going to be able to rank companies within. Right now, people are just like, I don't want to own whatever sector, probably the sector of a company I'm on a board of, except for digital. Once we get to these 5 things, or any of them, you're going to start to be able to differentiate who can make it over the mountain and who is going to have a very difficult time. And for investors, again, that's an interesting time to be picking stocks, because to go from people just getting broad sector exposure to looking at the companies within the sector and saying, who do I think is going to make it? Who I don't think is going to make it? Whose fortunes just got better? Sometimes going from being like a horrible company to a decent company, those are the best stocks. So I think there's going to be some interesting opportunities to think about that way.
And what about the size of the REIT sector? Do you think we'll see, whether it's through asset acquisitions or through combination with private groups or something like that? I mean, some of these sectors, and like Sam Chandan mentioned, we started the session with Sam Zell. Sam Zell has been talking about, flows of sectors into the REIT form for decades. Do you think we're going to begin to see that finally in terms of sectors that have, relatively small exposure in the REIT world?
I mean, you meaning just companies trying to get bigger?
Well, trying to get bigger and sectors where there's still, whatever regional malls, such a huge percentage are held by REITs. Other sectors, such a tiny percentage is held by REITs.
Again, like I think the last, I think that the last sort of big investment that I oversaw at APG was we took a big stake in Invitation Homes at their IPO. And that's kind of what you're talking about, where that is a completely fragmented industry without, at the time, without any organized institutional players. And so having more institutional players, you don't have to get to, maybe for the malls it's too high, right? Maybe it's become too high, but that period of becoming a more institutional asset class, a more REITed asset class,
right? Exactly.
Tends to be very, very good. The danger in that, of course, is once you get past a certain point, and maybe companies are building malls, just to keep their earnings going, and they're not selling malls like they should because of tax or what have you. So you have to sort of watch the discipline. But for most sectors, we're years away from that.
Mary, can I jump in with a question related to that specifically, actually, and then we'll get to questions from the audience. And thanks to all participants for sharing your thoughts. On the subject of single-family homes for rent, what is your general sense? I think there are a lot of folks in the market who are still of the view that it was a cyclical opportunity related to how cheaply folks could acquire homes at the bottom of the housing crisis. But it looks like there's some, personally, my view is that there's some longevity here, particularly, coming out of the crisis. There are many people who will want to live in, outside of the urban core, but for whom ownership is either not appropriate or viable. What is your general thinking?
Yeah, no, I really believe, I believed in it. I believed the whole time. I mean, granted, there was some amazing buying opportunities at the outset. And I love, the stories are so terrible, but awesome, of these big institutional players showing up at the auction and with like boxes of pizza and distracting potential buyers with the pizza and then going in and buying all the houses. Like it's I mean, there'll be great books written about it someday. But no, I think about people, people obviously, of course, people want to live in a house, or a lot of people do. But I think back to the financial crisis, and I think of friends of mine who had relocated to North Carolina or Miami for business. They lost their jobs. They had this big mortgage to move. Their industry kind of disappeared in those areas, and they took such a bath on those houses. And whether they came back to New York or went elsewhere, and if they had been renting those, if people had rented those houses for 5 years, it would have been a much better deal. And so that's just sort of a, I think that too many people owned houses, at the time of the financial crisis, and I think that offering people the ability to rent something that wasn't a conventional thing to rent, 10 years ago, is a great business model.
Yeah, and to your point, definitely don't want to understate the very real toll that the financial crisis and the loss of homes took on communities, and that there were segments of the market where families were disproportionately impacted by foreclosures, by displacement and loss of equity. One more, and then Scott, jump in after me. One of the things that has come up, you're in this really important role with a number of boards. For someone who is at a stage in their career where they are thinking about, maybe the next thing for me is a board role, or perhaps I'm, earlier in my career, but I'm thinking about what I should be doing now that maybe in 10 or 15 years, I could put my name out there for a board role. What kind of recommendations, suggestions do you have? What was your experience in becoming involved with boards? And how is that? I mean, I think you already sort of described how the role of a board member is quite different from being sort of an executive on the team.
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe if I describe a little bit of my past, that would help. And I would say that I had a few things working for me. One thing is having been around the industry for a long time, and representing, having the big footprint of APG in our industry, I had the good fortune to have a pretty high profile, right? You know, I spoke at a lot of events, people kind of knew who I was. And so I had that going for me. So I would encourage people to take advantage, even though I'm terrible at public speaking. It's so good that this is on TV and not in real life. I would be horrible. But make yourself do it, because it's a skill that everybody has to have these days. And it's a great way to raise your profile. So get involved in a splinter group and try to raise your profile that way. The most annoying piece of advice that anyone will give you is to say the best way to get on a board is to be on a board. It is so annoying, but it is so true. And I would say that, you know, to be honest, you know, when I think about sort of my trajectory, you know, there I was, you know, running this huge portfolio, speaking at a lot of conferences, very involved at Bowdoin College. And, you know, they realized that at Bowdoin College, oh, we have this person who has this, you know, expertise. I was so lucky to get on the board of Bowdoin, a nonprofit. And then once companies started thinking about, I think I probably was a person who would come up in people's minds. Having had that nonprofit experience on a serious board was really helpful to me getting my board experience. So, you know, and nonprofits need real estate people so badly right now. And so I would encourage people to seek that out. And then finally, you know, because of what I did at APG, I actually had a lot of exposure going in and meeting with boards. Sometimes boards want to hear from somebody who owns a lot of their stock. Sometimes they want to hear from people who own none of their stock, but a lot of times they wanted to hear about our views on ESG. So I think that, you know, if you know, ESG is a pretty smart way to get a pretty high profile, even in your own company. And you might get a chance to get into your own boardroom and talk to people about that. And once your board sees how good you are, that also really can help you get a board seat down the road.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, we have several people on Schack's board, which is obviously a not-for-profit, that over the last year or two have also taken on, you know, board positions with major real estate firms.
Oh, that's great.
Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, great, thanks. You had a great role at APG in that you were an investor looking at both the public and private sectors. Not a lot of investors get to do that. I think there's a lot of complementary aspects to that. Would you agree and maybe speak to some of those?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. You know, coming into, you know, I spent my entire adult life, I've spent my entire adult life in the REITs, although when I was hired as an analyst, I was an analyst in investment banking at Merrill Lynch, and I was in the financial institutions group, the FIG group. And back then, REITs were not considered real estate. Like Richard Saltzman was real estate. Like FIG was that. You know, REITs were like a financing structure. And once, you know, once Richard kind of disrupted the REIT industry by bringing these fully integrated great companies and making them the public companies, you know, things changed. You know, but as a result, you know, I'm a financial expert, but I have not, you know, negotiated a lease beyond for myself. I haven't, you know, I don't have a lot of that growing up in the trenches real estate experience. I think it is extremely helpful to REIT investors to have a proper background, you know, like that. I also think, you know, I've said a few times, I think that the REIT industry is ripe for innovation, and that the companies that are going to be the next blue chips of the next 10 years are going to be innovating outside of the box, so to speak. And I think that I look at a lot of these prop tech companies, and I get that how amazing that is, but I wasn't the one crunching the numbers and doing the Argus runs. I don't think Argus is a thing anymore, but
It is. Students, don't listen to Mary on that one. Argus is still a thing.
I still got it. So glad to hear that. But anyway, you know, knowing how technology can make things like that so much better, it really is going to help you with your stock picking.
That was fantastic. Thanks.
Adam?
Mary, we touched on it a little bit in terms of talking with Scott just now, but you know, one of the things everyone's required to answer if they come on these sessions is like, what's your advice to students? If you're starting out in the real estate world, or you're a student at Schack or elsewhere, and you want to go into the real estate world, what should you do? Go into the FIG group?
Go to the FIG group. It's where, yeah, I mean, that's a great way to learn about a lot of things. First of all, I spend a lot of my free time mentoring young people who just graduated from college, a lot of women, a lot of people who are trying to get ahead in their real estate careers. So I love, and I'm one of the reasons I really love what you guys do here. So I'm happy to answer that. I want to say to all of you that I'm sorry that the job market is what it is right now. This is a really tough time to be looking for work or changing your career, especially when, like I said, all those things I said are unknown. But this has happened to all of us, and it's going to get better. And the good news is you're less expensive than a lot of people that have some of those jobs now. And there's going to be a moment where, your sort of generation of people that are looking to start a career or change careers, you're going to get some outsized experience relative to your previous experience, because people, once people need people, they're going to need them quickly, and you're going to get more responsibility than you thought. The two best pieces of advice I have, besides my apology for the world, is don't be too picky. I mean, it sounds silly, but so many of the kids that young people that I talk to are, I'll say, oh, I saw that there's this job, and in let's say in at a multifamily developer in LA. And they'll be like, yeah, that sounds good, but I really want to be doing industrial, and I want to be doing like socially responsible and like, no, just like take the job right now. And getting any kind of real estate experience is great experience. And your first job is not always your forever job. It's rarely your forever job. But just another quick thing too is look to I also see a lot of people that don't use their network properly. A great network is not always someone like me, although I love to help people, but a lot of times somebody can help you more who graduated from this program 2 years ago, right? They work at a good real estate company, they know the hiring manager. So work your networks like that, and don't forget to, and there a lot of times the people who are just a few years ahead of you can help you most in getting your job.
Yeah, and certainly, for students, just as a reminder, those of you who are at Schack specifically, we have a program, Executive in Residence, where we feature folks like Mary. We also have Alumni in Residence that focuses on exactly what she just described. Folks that may have graduated in the last 2, 3, 5 years that are for whom the process of finding that right job is a recent memory. And to Mary's point, you might know folks on the team that are thinking about what the staffing needs are, what skills they need. So it's a balance of offering both of those opportunities, and to do that in small groups. Mary, to your point, I think for students, the networking after you graduate, you think about it a lot like the networking when you're in school. There's class, but there's also all the other things that you're doing in the industry, all the co-curriculars, all the extracurriculars. Think about all those industry organizations, associations, some of which are niche, some of which are very broad, that you can become a part of to really expand your network beyond even the folks that you're meeting at the office and as part of your work every day. Mary, I'm fascinated by your involvement with Industrious, and I know you've commented a little bit on how different sectors are being disrupted. There's a speculative element for all of us who are thinking about strategy and planning over the medium term. What is your sense of which of the changes in behavior that we've observed over the course of the last 6-9 months might have the greatest persistence over the long term in terms of how we use space?
I think there's especially to relate to Industrious. I first want to say one of the most interesting things about being involved there is Industrious is a tenant, right? I mean, they're in the real estate business, but they're a tenant. It is so fascinating for me to hear the tenant perspective in this environment. The fact that this pandemic is accelerating trends that were already happening. I think there are certain pockets of real estate, and I would say office is one of them, where business has been done the exact same way for like 100 years. I mean, it really has been, right? I mean, you want to be in a building because of the location, and then you sign your lease, you get a tenant improvement, you get a work letter, and then like at APG we had this super nice office manager named Mark, and Mark was not an architect. He's such a nice guy, did a great job for us. Not an architect, not an organizational strategist, not a builder, but he designed our office, right? Like. And that is just not enough for people anymore, right? I think that even before this was happening, this trend of people wanting to like where they're spending their time, that's important. As for now, I think that working from home is a permanent thing. I don't think permanently your house exactly all the time is what it is. I think, a lot of I'm fascinated by the subject for a variety of reasons. Mostly when I think about the future of cities, to be honest, right? And because all those things I just talked about, you just took right out of the equation, right? Where your office building is located and how nice your office is. Well, my house is nice, whatever. But a lot of companies, I think, you're going to see them move to a hybrid, right? Like 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, let's say. And the idea is you do your collaborative work when you're in the office, and you do your non-collaborative work, even though that might be on the phone and things, when you're not in the office. So office space needs to be different to accommodate that. Oh, I also think that ultimately it's not a necessity, it's an amenity. I mean, I think flexibility is a benefit that you're being offered, right, by your company. So I think that the office space kind of is going to need to be resigned to accommodate safe collaboration. But there's all these other interesting things to think about, like, what if you can only go to the office for 3 days, where are you going to go the other 2 days? Or this whole idea of collaborating and state-of-the-art technology in your office and distancing. There's a lot of ways I think that these that companies that provide flexible working space are going to really play a role in the new office. It's really interesting.
One of the things that we're also looking at is how different households, different families are impacted by the back to work decisions being made by local public schools, and how it's having the impact on families that may have access to daycare, childcare, alternative alternative platforms for online or in-person education versus those that don't, is having a significant impact on what we think of as the long-term engagement in the workforce. Mary, this is fascinating. I agree. It's the most interesting topic, right? We have time for one more question. Scott or Adam?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great, thanks. I love your conversation about innovation and diverse points of views. And if I think about that from an investor point of view, I would imagine actively managed versus passively managed funds should outperform. We haven't always seen that. What are your thoughts on that? Is it more of a cyclical aspect? Later cycle, rising tide lifts all boats, and passive funds do better than early cycle, or?
I think a lot of it has had to do in the past several years. A lot of it has had to do with fund flows, right? I see an advertisement all the time for an ETF on TV. I don't really see advertisements for actively managed funds on TV anymore, right? Unfortunately, those are less accessible to regular people than they used to be, and that's very frustrating. But then, the way the ETF works, right, is you're buying and selling an index every day. So every day you're buying the winners and selling the losers. And these funds are so big that has been a problem for dedicated investors. It was very frustrating to me at the time because, because the more money that is just going into the benchmark makes your individual pick more wrong or more right, and there's not much you can do. Like I said, I think that, being at this apex of misery could maybe be helpful to that. I mean, I think that if broader investors started to see opportunity in real estate, we sure could use a shot of that, even if it goes into the indices, and that would raise everything. But given sort of the relative liquidity too, which is the range of liquidity in the REITs has never been what it is before, I think there could be some opportunities for companies for traditional REIT investors to outperform despite what's going on with the index.
So Mary, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. I know how busy you are, but this was just fascinating. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much.
Don't forget, next week we have same time, same place. Ann Segrest McCullough will be joining us. So please make sure that's on your calendar. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Take care.